sometimes I think one of the biggest barriers to us tackling the climate crisis is our own lack of imagination and not actually believing that we can do this.
This is Climate Curious, the podcast for people who are bored, scared, or confused by climate change.
I'm Maryam, Pasha, the director and curator at TEDx London and the co-host of this podcast, alongside the amazing Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben Hurst, activist and advocate exploring what positive masculinities can look like, and self-confessed climate normie.
Ben, this conversation has been almost a year in the making, right? We first met the person we're going to talk to today a year ago at TED Countdown in Edinburgh. And you know what I was thinking about? I was thinking about how sometimes when we meet people, Ben, you feel like they're superheroes.
Yeah.
Like they're part of the Avengers or something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Some people are villains and some people are heroes.
Yeah. And this is the latter.
Yeah.
You thought I was going to say villain.
I was like, what? No, this is a hero. This is a superhero. Yeah.
And I think that one of the things about climate that, you know, is like the purpose of this podcast as well, is that it can feel like overwhelming.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked to Clover Hogan about eco-anxiety. We've talked to people about how sometimes it can feel like a big, unwieldy, wicked problem.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I really love hearing about is when we win. Right? I want to talk about the wins. So should we talk about the wins?
Let's talk about the wins. Let's talk about the wins. Okay, so check it. We've got with us today Anne Hitt. And Maryam is the Senior Director at Climate Imperative. Now listen to me when I'm telling you this. This is serious, right? Maryam has been doing this. She's got over 25 years of experience in building and in leading effective campaigns and organizations. She was also with the Sierra Club for about 12 years, where she served as the National Director of Campaigns, and she also worked as the Director of the Beyond Coal campaign, which was actually recognised as one of the most successful environmental campaigns in history. And that is not an over-exaggeration, right? The campaign blocked the construction of 200 proposed US coal plants. It also secured the retirement of 2/3 of the existing US coal plants, and it helped usher in this new clean energy era. And it also inspired sister Beyond Coal campaigns all around the world. Now, I have to start by saying thank you, Maryam, so much for joining us. And I think the place that we want to start this, right, is with a story. So can you tell us a story of a win?
Well, I would love to, and thank you for having me, my fellow Avengers, fellow heroes for the planet. Let's please all go out there together with our fancy outfits and do
Ben's
good.
Iron Man suit. I don't want to be Iron Man. I take that back immediately. But yeah, someone else.
We'll get back to you on our specific characters.
Exactly. That's another podcast.
Well, let me tell you the big story of a win, which is the story of the Beyond Coal campaign that I had the honor to lead for a decade. When we, a decade ago in the United States, we were getting half of our electricity from coal. It was the biggest contributor to climate change and all sorts of very dangerous air and water pollution. And over the course of a decade, this incredible grassroots movement succeeded in securing the retirement of 2/3 of the coal plants in the United States. So currently, out of 530 coal plants that we had a decade ago, 358 are retired or slated to retire. So again, 530 to 358 down. So about 172 remaining. We were getting half of our electricity from coal in the US. Now it's less than 20%. We're now getting more electricity from renewable energy than from coal in the United States. And it has been the lion's share of the greenhouse gas reductions in the United States. I think 80% of the greenhouse gas reduction. So I know that's a lot of numbers in there, but the headline is this is a grassroots people-powered movement that transformed how we make electricity in the United States away from fossil fuels toward renewable energy. And we just keep going and growing and making more and more progress.
How does it feel? How does it feel to be a part of something like that or to lead something like that? What's the...
I've been thinking about this recently because I I left the Sierra Club a year ago, and so I've been kind of reflecting back. And I feel like when you're in the middle of something like that, you don't always realize that you're in the middle of something historic because you're so busy doing it.
Right.
And so we were so busy. A lot of these coal plants were making people sick. They were like giving kids asthma in the neighborhoods. They were releasing this toxic coal ash into the water. And so you're running around visiting people, learning about the struggles that they're having with pollution. You're trying to get decision makers to listen to you. But I would say the main thing that I always took away was working with people and working with folks on the ground who, again, are living with pollution, who are David and Goliath, really taking on these incredibly powerful industries and being a small part of being able to help them win, helping David beat Goliath and seeing it happen again and again and again, coal plant after coal plant after coal plant. It just gave me a huge appreciation for how much is possible and how much we actually can change the world.
Right. I think, like, as somebody from the outside looking in, as we've been saying, as you like to say, from somebody like a normal civilian, I think, especially at the beginning of this whole like podcasting journey and learning about the climate crisis and what's going on, this felt unachievable. Like the whole thing felt like this is an impossible task. We're destined to fail. It's so nice to hear like a story of like a real success like that, and that's like tangible success, right? Not just like, oh yeah, the data's changed or like we've done, but like real lives, real people, real climate change like impacted in real ways, which is like incredible. Good job.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Well done. I'm proud of you.
Me and many, many other people on behalf of all of them. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to take us back 10 years ago then, because I do think that right now, because of the work you guys have done, people think about coal and they think, yeah, well, it's like yesterday's news, which is a testament to the work, right? Is in the mindset shift. But I want you, if you can, to take us to a decade ago. You gave us the top line numbers about how much coal was being used, but what was the attitude like? Like, did you, when this campaign started, did it really feel like you were trying to move a mountain?
It absolutely felt like we were trying to move a mountain. And actually what brought me into this was trying to save mountains because the coal industry was blowing them up in Appalachia. And I'm from Appalachia. I live in West Virginia now. And the coal industry was literally trying to blow up mountains. No, they weren't trying. They were blowing up. They blew up hundreds of mountains across Appalachia. I don't
think people really understand where coal comes from. I have to tell you, I just had no idea. I just assumed it was in the ground. You went down and got it. I didn't realize.
Which historically was what they did, but the coal is in the mountain like layers in a cake, and so this was a cheaper way to get the coal because it required fewer people, and so they would drill a bunch of explosives, blow up the rock, scrape off the coal layer, drill down to the next layer of rock, shovel that into the valleys, and literally flatten hundreds of mountains in Appalachia. Wow. So that was happening, and I was working with grassroots folks trying to stop it. And there was this one new coal-fired power plant that was proposed in the same region. So we started working to just try to stop this one new coal plant because we thought if they build this, then they're going to have all the more reason to keep blowing the mountains up. And it turned out it was one of 200 new coal-fired power plants that were proposed in the U.S. in the sort of George W. Bush era, early 2000s. And there were people fighting them all over the place, grassroots people. And we all kind of found each other and got connected and started learning from each other. And we stopped 200 coal plants from being built in the United States. And had they been built, obviously, we'd have been locked into this most polluting energy source for another 50 years. And there would have been no space for clean energy. The world would be a very different place. And the climate outlook would be very different. And in doing all that, we learned we could win. And we learned how the decisions got made. And so we then we realized, if we can stop these, 200 coal plants, there's 530 existing coal plants. And let's use what we've learned and try to start retiring those. And back to your question, what was it like? People thought we were crazy. I mean, people thought it was impossible,
right? Because
if you think back to 2008, Barack Obama was running for president. Part of his platform was supporting clean coal. This was a marketing phrase from the coal industry that people were using all the time. The coal industry was making half of our electricity. People said if we transition anything, the lights will go out and people's electricity bills will go up. And so it was seen as just a wild, impossible thing to try to attempt when we set on this course a decade ago.
I have like goosebumps.
Yeah, this is a good story. It almost feels like like watching a film rather than
it's proper Avengers,
like your actual real life. Yeah,
it feels really familiar. That narrative we're hearing now, right, around gas and around oil. I don't want to take us away from the story for a second, but I want to find out whether you feel like now, in hindsight, looking back, you can draw these threads through to other polluting fossil fuel industries.
Absolutely. It is a similar playbook of the gas industry, the oil industry, the coal industry, which is to, kind of dominate the market, but also dominate the politics and then make people very fearful of the alternatives. And, I think whether you look at the U.S. right now in the places where the grid has really been strained by climate change, in places like California and Texas, which have had extreme weather that has tested the grid, it's actually been renewable energy that has kept the lights on and things like battery storage. If you look right now across Europe, where there's a huge energy crisis over Russian oil and gas and coal being cut off, the long-term energy security solution is renewable energy because you don't have to buy the sun and the wind from, Vladimir Putin, and you will have this forms of energy for, yeah, he's pretty diabolical. Let's be real. Maybe he'll find a way. And so I do think that it's the same playbook from the fossil fuel industry that they scare people that you can't live without this energy source, that your lights will go out, your electricity bills will go up, your power bills will go up. And the reality is the solution to all of this is renewable energy in it. And now renewable energy is actually cheaper than fossil fuels. And it's getting at the scale that it can power huge parts of our economy. And so I really think we should just prepare ourselves to see a lot more of their confusing PR and dirty tricks and interference with politics, but the trends are on the side of clean energy. The economics, the politics, and the public will now are all on the side of clean energy.
Does it feel like you have moved from being the underdog to being on the winning side, or do you still feel like you're fighting on that kind of journey?
Once an underdog, always an underdog, maybe. Right. I think it's hard to actually make that switch. And I think in the US now, we just passed this big piece of climate legislation, and I got to go to the White House and be part of this huge celebration for the passage of the bill. And I had that thought about just switching our own mindsets from not always being the underdog, but actually realizing that the momentum has shifted to your side, and how do you take advantage of it? Because this is the key decade for the climate. And now we have this big policy in the US that's going to help us continue this transition away from coal to clean energy. And it's signaling to the rest of the world that we're going to step up and do something. And we're not just going to be showing up at climate negotiations and making pledges and then going home and not delivering on them. So I do think it's a game changer. And I think getting out of, at some level, will always be an underdog when it comes to the money of the fossil fuel industry. They're always going to be able to blanket the world with commercials and fill up the coffers of politicians, campaign funds. And we'll always be an underdog, or for a long time at least, financially. But I think, again, the economics, the technology, and the public are all now on our side. And so we have to do as much as we can with that momentum and just keep going.
I want to understand what it takes to shut down a coal plant. Like, how does one do that?
I respect the people who are doing that, making that sacrifice. So one of the things about the Beyond Coal campaign that was, I think, a sort of a transformational insight was that decisions about how we make electricity in the United States were not all made in Washington, and they were not all made in the White House or in the Congress. They were being made in states. And so as advocates, we had to learn how to go into those places and make the kind of arguments that those decision makers were going to hear, which were about keeping the lights on and keeping energy bills low. And we learned how to make the argument that clean energy was actually the way to keep the lights on and keep energy bills low. And we were up against these huge electric utilities that are essentially monopolies. And so we were very much the underdog in those venues, but we learned how to make good arguments. The other thing that we did was at the national level, there were all of these huge loopholes for coal pollution. So when President Obama came into office, there were no standards for coal plant greenhouse gases or mercury, which is this neurotoxin.
Yeah.
There were no federal standards for that. They were just putting 100% of it in the air. There were no federal standards for the coal ash, which is this stuff that's like the ash in a fireplace. Wow. And it's full of toxic heavy metals. And it was the second biggest volume of solid waste in the United States after municipal garbage. And there were no federal standards for, like, it was literally getting dumped in holes in the ground. So we took these loopholes and we pushed the EPA to either close them or shrink them with new regulations. And so that was the other part of what forced changes was once these coal plants had to actually deal with their pollution, then they thought, oh, well, do we want to spend a bunch of money on this coal plant to get it up to date, or do we just want to retire it and look at other options? So it was the federal pressure and the state pressure together was how we kind of
smart.
So
really smart.
I want to pull this apart because this is so fascinating, because I think that when we're thinking about campaigning, and I remember this realization in like a totally different realm, when I was working more in human rights, is figuring out where the decisions are made, right? I think we all assume that decisions are made at the highest levels, but not all decisions are made there. So that's something that I took from there, is like identifying that. And then the other thing is making it too expensive to continue business as usual, right? Which seems like so smart. I want to ask you a strategy question, because I think sometimes when we are campaigning on something that we feel very deeply about, our arguments seem to sometimes be like moral or ethical arguments. But what I'm hearing from you is you made economic arguments and you made data arguments. And I want to understand, how do these things come together? How have you found them to be effective in the mix?
Well, the way that you described it is exactly the way we thought about this problem. And I would encourage anyone who cares about some piece of the climate puzzle to think about is, what are you trying to do? What's your actual goal? So in our case, it was retire all the coal plants and replace them with clean energy. Mm-hmm. Who can give you that? And it's not like an institution. It's not the United States government or some big corporation. It's actually, is there a person? Is there a decision maker or a couple of decision makers somewhere that have the power to make that decision? And who are the people and the groups of people that they listen to, and what are the messages that are going to motivate either, those audiences or that decision maker themselves?
Because my assumption is, like, with the general public, you are trying to pull on people's heartstrings, right? Like, you're trying to convince them that this is about being a good person or doing a good thing in the world. Whereas for people whose motivation is making money and doing good business, we asked someone the other day about whether people are who are innovating within the climate space are doing it because they are good people, or they're doing it because it will make money. And the person's response was they're doing it because they can see that it's the future. And we asked again for clarification. They just repeated the same thing. But I think it's that idea of, like, what is the correct way of communicating that message? Because it's always the same message, right? Like, regardless of who you're talking to, but it's just a different way of communicating it.
I agree. And I think there is the need also to just have the broader general public mobilized and fired up about what needs to change. Right. And that it's not this sort of more targeted campaign strategy is not the only thing we need to do in the world. We also need to I think the reason we were able to pass a climate bill in the United States, because we have, people are having fires on their doorsteps and they're having floods on their doorsteps. And this movement has educated people over the years to help connect the dots and point to there's a better future. There's clean energy. There are clean energy jobs. There's economic opportunities with clean energy. So let's go down this new path. So I think we have to do both. Mm-hmm. We have to do the mass education and mobilization, and you don't want to confuse that with a campaign strategy. Right. It's not sufficient. You've also got to pinpoint what are the things you're trying to change. Who are the decision makers? How do you get them to make the decision that you're wanting them to make? And I think we have to do both.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's this both and mentality that we need. Yeah. I was reflecting on a conversation earlier about sometimes it can be frustrating when people are all one or all the other. or not people, when you feel like a campaign or a movement is all one or all the other. And actually, it's so much more valuable if you can see the role that people have to play.
Right.
That some people have to be the loud people or the people who glue themselves to things, right? And some people have to be the ones that are thinking strategically and having the conversations. And I think it's when we pit those people against one another that the incumbent wins.
I agree.
Every podcast needs a GOAT.
That's greatest of all time.
And ours is the global bank Citi.
Citi is TEDx London and Climate Curious's headline partner and has been with us every step of the way on this podcast, supporting our vision and encouraging us to be courageous and adventurous with our ideas.
Instead of your typical boring ad, we actually thought you might be more interested to hear about some of the initiatives that Citi has played a part in.
The Citi Foundation backed the world's first thermal packaging material made from surplus feathers, called Plumo, produced by London-based startup AeroPowder. This was through the Citi Foundation's work with the Mayor's Entrepreneur Programme.
Using surplus feathers is great because 1, it reduces waste, 2, it contributes to a circular economy, and 3, it reduces our reliance on plastics, which we typically use for packaging.
It's cool to see how supporting student projects can help grow a whole new generation of green businesses.
Nice one, Citi.
Thank you for making this podcast possible.
Now, back to the show.
So going back to this campaign for a second, the Beyond Coal campaign. So you had these huge successive wins in the US. Where did you go? Like what happened? Because coal is still an issue in other parts of the world. I mean, obviously it's still part of the mix here and the work is still ongoing. But what about globally? What's the picture like?
Well, one of the exciting things that happened in the around 2016, 17 is other countries started creating their own Beyond Coal campaigns. So there is a Europe Beyond Coal campaign. That's a coalition of 40 organizations. There is a Japan, South Korea, and Australia Beyond Coal campaigns with, kind of that shared name and vision and branding of phasing out coal and replacing it with clean energy in those geographies. And now there's a whole global network of advocates from every continent that are all working to move away from coal to clean energy. And now I think it's a pretty universal. I mean, the big climate conference last year in Glasgow, these are not my words. These are the words of the United Nations, uniting the world to consign coal to history. And I was sitting in the room with Bruce Nillis, who he and I ran the Beyond Coal campaign together for 10 years. Sitting in the room in Glasgow, seeing those words on the screen of uniting the world to consign coal to history. And I was blown away that in a decade, the work that we and so many other people had done had shifted the debate and shifted the terms and shifted everyone's mindset so much that now it was just not a matter of whether we're going to consign coal to history, but when and how fast.
Right.
And so I think that it truly is now a global shared understanding that we have to get away from coal as fast as we can, and that we need to replace it with clean energy and not with renewable energy and not gas. And that's just a testament to advocates and advocacy and tenacious determination over many, many years.
So what is the next move for you? Like, because for me, I feel like I would crave the feeling of going back to the feeling of the underdog and going back to the beginning and going back to the grassroots stuff. And do you start the cycle again somewhere else with a different issue, or is there
Well, I think one of the things that so the thing about this moment is we are running out of time. And so what I'm really thinking about is how do we scale this to go even bigger and even faster? Because we don't just need to get off of coal in the electricity sector. We need to get off of all fossil fuels in the electricity sector. Right. And we need to electrify buildings and industry and transportation so that we're driving cars and living in homes that are powered by electricity, and that electricity is clean. And we need to ratchet up that progress in all those areas as fast as we can this decade. And so I'm really thinking about how to take the lessons that we learned and then, learn things from other folks and other movements and exponentially speed up that progress.
This story just makes me super happy. And when I'm happy, I'm quiet, as opposed to every other member on this podcast. When I'm when I'm worked up.
I need to say some things.
I think knowing that we can win is so important. Otherwise, it feels like a never-ending battle. To know that actually other people moved unmovable things. I think that's just equally as important.
Yeah.
I agree with you so much. Sometimes I think one of the biggest barriers to us tackling the climate crisis is our own lack of imagination and not actually believing that we can do this. And I believe that we can. I really do. And I think if you think about just in the US, the progress in the last decade, just on how we make electricity, and then having passed this piece of legislation that is going to really accelerate and turbocharge this kind of transition across our whole economy, and then the signal that sends around the world. I really believe that we are the architects of our future, and it's not the fossil fuel industry, that we are the ones who are going to write the next chapter of our future. And I think if we step into climate work with that orientation, that we can actually win. Our ambition is higher and our audacity is greater, and the things that we can achieve are beyond even what we can imagine.
You talked about the signals. What signals do you think it can send, and what is your hope on an international level for movement?
So there were several organizations that modeled the greenhouse gas impact of this bill, and largely all kind of came to the same conclusion. The president's goal is 50% greenhouse gas reductions this decade. This gets us 40%. So this gets us within striking distance of actually meeting the climate goal that then puts us in the United States in alignment with the overall world, Paris climate targets. So in terms of how much this can bring greenhouse gases down this decade, it is extraordinary. And I think that in of itself is important because it will spur innovation. It will spur the creation of new businesses, new industries, lots of new jobs, lots of new kind of there are going to be a lot of new stakeholders who are very wedded to and have a lot of ownership in continuing this clean energy economy. So I think here the momentum's just going to grow.
It's awesome. It makes me feel very hopeful, right? Yeah. Like we need like these moments, like these acceleration moments, and that's what it feels like. So I'm just super grateful that you have come and shared the story with us, and just also really grateful for the work that you have done and continue to do. Like it is awesome to watch.
And now it's time for our climate confessions. Let's fess up to the bad habits we just can't kick.
It's come to that time in the episode, Maryam, where we're going to ask you your climate confession.
Well, I do live in West Virginia, as you know, and so I must confess that I'm pretty sure my electricity is still like 90% coal.
No. Cut the end the podcast, end the episode, cancel the whole thing. This is
I am you have no flaming hypocrite.
This is the thing, actually. This is such a good one, because can you even really control that because of where you live?
Well, this is I think a good example of the limits of individual choices versus systems. I mean, if I could have a switch on my wall that said the solar switch versus the coal switch, I would obviously switch on the solar switch to get, the grid to be sending me power that is clean. But West Virginia the whole world knows that Senator Manchin was my senator holding up climate progress because he's so tied to the coal industry, and the coal industry still controls the state. And so most of our electricity still comes from coal. We're one of the most coal-dependent states in the country. And a further confession,
part two.
My house I lived in before, we did have solar, but in this house there are a lot of trees. And so if we wanted to have solar, we would have to cut down a bunch of trees, which seems like kind of defeating the purpose to cut a bunch of trees down and put up solar panels. So we don't have solar on our house. And so I'm just dependent on the grid. And I think it motivates me to keep going until someday maybe my electricity is 50% coal or 30% coal in West Virginia. But it's the kind of our individual choices can only get us so far, and then we have to change these systems.
This is so true. And also I think that reflecting on knowing you, Maryam, and this story and where you live, one of the reasons I think it's so powerful is it's very easy to be like, we shouldn't use coal when you live somewhere where you can just be like, I'll get my electricity from wind, or where maybe the people down the road from you's jobs aren't dependent on the coal industry, or where you don't live in a place where the whole society is tied to this industry. Yeah. So for you to do this work where you are from and not to move, which I'm sure has been tempting.
It's beautiful there. I love it.
Well, I mean, we won't sing the song.
You hear
but
that, everyone? She loves the coal.
No, she loves West Virginia.
The secret is out. Don't tell anyone.
Super meaningful, right? I think it adds another layer and a dimension to this story that I really appreciate, because I think that maybe I would be like, I just don't want to be here anymore, but to stay and to be embedded in that community and to fight is just awesome. So thank you for sharing it with us, and thank you for doing the work.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. And remember, stay curious. Thank you for joining us this week. We really hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you did, please hit the follow button to make sure you get next week's release.
We are now officially crowdsourcing Climate Confession, so please leave yours in the ratings and the reviews section, and we'll shout out for you next time.
A huge thank you to our headline partner, City, who has supported us for the past 6 years to bring world-changing ideas to the TEDx London stage, and has championed Climate Curious since day one.
And shout out to our fabulous team behind the pod.
This episode was produced by Josie Coulter.
Comms written by Tess Lowry.
Artwork designed by Rebecca Mingus.
Curation by Maryam Pasha.
Mixed and engineered by Ben Beheshti.
Music also by Ben Beheshti.
Presented by Ben Hurst
and Maryam Pasha. Remember, stay curious.